Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. For today's card, I started with a piece of Canson watercolor paper taped down to a hard board. The board that I use is actually just a bamboo cutting board that I got at Walmart. I'm going to be painting a galaxy background using my Gansai Tambi watercolor set. I have the 36 set of Gansai Tambi watercolors, and I have found with this set that depending on where you buy it, your color names might be different from other people's color names, but the color numbers are the same. So I'm going to just be using the color numbers so that there isn't any confusion. So for that first layer of colors, I used color numbers 62, 57, 139, and 37. And I was doing all of my painting on dry paper. I didn't lay down any water before I started adding the paint. I let that layer dry, and then I started adding this second layer of color. And for this layer, I'm using the same exact colors except for number 37. And I like to just kind of tilt my board around and let those colors kind of run together and move around a bit. I find it pretty difficult to mess up a galaxy background because you're basically going for a mess of colors, and then you add your stars, and that's when the magic happens. So you might be doing your painting and thinking that it's not going well and it looks like a mess and you're tempted to start over, but you got to stick it out and get those stars on there because the stars is what really brings it all together. I wanted this background to be pretty dark because it is a galaxy background. So in order to do that with watercolors, you have to keep layering. So you add one layer of color and then you let it completely dry, and you add another layer, and you keep doing that until it's as dark as you want it to be. Once I was happy with the color, I added my black, and this is where it starts to really look like a mess and you're worried that you made a mistake, but then you add your stars and everything works out. Now, when I do my galaxy backgrounds, I like my edges to be really dark. I like a nice vignette look. So in order to achieve that, I use a black dye ink. In this case, I'm using Raven ink from Brutus Monroe, and I'm using a blending tool to blend that along my edges. And this way, I can soften that ink as I get towards the middle so that it blends nicely into that background. Okay, so here you can see I started adding those stars, and you can really see how it takes the whole thing to the next level. I put some white watercolor paint onto an acrylic block, and I just added a little bit of water to it so that it had a nice consistency and could move around. And then I used a paintbrush in order to flick that paint off of the block onto my paper. And the smaller size paintbrush that you use, the smaller those little stars are going to be. So I actually used a number 2 paintbrush and a number 4 for a little bit of variety. Once I finished adding the stars and once they were completely dry, I took that same Raven black ink and I added a little bit more to the edges, and I very, very softly added some to the center so that I'd have some cloudy looking areas. I took out the Simon Says Stamp Triangle Blast Stencil and I taped it over the top of that background. And I'm adding some Nuvo Moonstone Glimmer paste over the top of that stencil using my palette knife. I do want to say, just so that I'm being very honest about this, I kind of regret using this paste, only because it didn't turn out exactly the way I had envisioned. I was really hoping for it to be more transparent so that you could see the galaxy background through it, but it ended up being very opaque and kind of a bluish green color. I still think it's very pretty, and I made it work because I made a card that I really love, but I do have some ideas on how I could have made it better, so I think I'll use those ideas on a future card. I carefully removed the tape while the paste was still wet, and then I set it aside to dry. While that was drying, I started working on my sentiment. For my sentiment, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Lucky to Know You die set, and I cut that 3 times out of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock. I used my Gina K Designs Connect glue in order to glue those 3 sentiments together to create a nice dimensional sentiment. After I added all the really tiny dots of glue onto one of the pieces, I would take that piece and I would press it down onto a piece of scrap paper. This removes some of that excess glue so that when I place it onto the next piece, I don't have any of that glue oozing out of the sides. Once my background was completely dry, I cut it down to be 4 by 5 1/4, and then I popped it up onto an A2 size card base using some foam tape. I then glued my sentiment to the center of the card using the same Gina K-Connect glue, and I did the same thing where I pressed down the piece onto a scrap piece of paper in order to remove some of that excess adhesive. Now, this background does have a little bit of dimension to it just because of that texture paste. So because of that, I think it's a really good idea to hold down each part of the sentiment after you glue it and give it a little bit of time to dry so that it really adheres nicely. Now, the background on this card has quite a bit going on, so I didn't want to add too much more after the sentiment. So I took out these little raindrop embellishments from Lucy's cards, and I thought that they would be perfect because they're kind of subtle. I tried to use my pick-me-up tool in order to help me place these raindrops, but as you can see, I struggled a little bit, and that's because this pick-me-up tool is pretty old and a lot of the tacky stuff in the tip is gone now and it doesn't really stick. So I think I'm going to have to get a new tool. I think I'm going to try that Crystal Katana tool. It looks like it works really well. Anyways, once I finished adding those raindrops, this card was all done, and here's a closer look at the finished card. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you really enjoyed this card design featuring some products from Simon Says Stamp. All of the supplies that I used for today's card can be found in the description down below. If this is your first time on my channel and you enjoyed watching today, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I do new card videos every single week, and I'm going to be back with another one really soon. Again, thank you for watching. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you have a good day today.